right, welcome to Chapter 3. We are working on percents for 3.1. All right, so we're going to work on converting from a percent to a decimal. So the first step we do is you're going to replace the percent symbol by dividing the number by 100. And then second step is to complete dividing by 100. What you do is you move the decimal 2 places to the left. All right, so for example 1, we're going to convert 35% into a decimal. All right, well, the first step is we're going to get rid of that percent sign. Okay, so this right here, this little symbol is sort of the next step. It's not necessarily the equal sign. It's just telling me that the next step we're looking at is what I'm going to write right over here. So it's kind of like an arrow, but with an equal sign to it. So 35%, we're going to write it as 35 over 100. Okay, that was the first step. So we got, I think some ways some people like to think of it, that kind of looks like 100. There's the 1 and the 2 zeros. So we're just rewriting the 100 in a different form. That's a fun way of thinking of it. Okay, and then when you're dividing anything by 100, you just move the decimal place 2 places to the left. So for 35, the decimal is over there. Let's write that on a sticky note. So for the number 35, where's the decimal? Well, the decimal is right here. Since we don't really need it, most people like to leave off the decimal, but that's actually where the decimal will be. So you're going to go ahead and move it to 2 places to the left. And that's our new decimal. And remember, what do we need to put on the left? Hopefully you said 0. Remember, you got to put that 0 in front. It's very important if you're actually going to be working with dosages in decimals. All right, so we move the decimal over 2 places, 0.35. All right, so for B, convert 146% into a decimal. Well, very similar to the other one. Oops, I forgot the 6. All right, so we're going to get rid of that percent symbol by dividing by 100. 146 out of 100. And then we'll end up moving the decimal 2 places to the left. So let's go ahead. Where is the decimal on 146? Try to figure out where the decimal is. Okay, so this right there is where the decimal will be. So we're going to move 2 places to the left. 1, 2. Oh, weird. We didn't fully move all the way, but it's okay. Nothing wrong. We just moved the decimal 2 places, and that is where we ended up. 1.46. All right, so 146% is 1.46. Let's convert 0.6% into a decimal. Now you might be confused and say, wait, but that's already a decimal. It's okay. Just repeat the steps as you know them. The steps as we know them, 0.6%. We'll get rid of that percent symbol by dividing by 100. Okay, and as we've done before, we're going to locate our decimal and move it to the left 2 places. So where's our decimal? Well, our decimal is here, and we're going to move to the left 2 places. 1, 2. All right, when we did that, we created that empty space there, so I'm going to go ahead and fill in that with a 0. There's our decimal. And remember, as always, we want to put that extra 0 if we don't have a whole number. Well, there's a lot of zeros going on there. Oops, look at that. Too many zeros. Okay. 0, 6. And there we go. Make sure your decimal point is nice and noticeable. And we're done. So the decimal might have looked a little scary in the beginning, but as long as you stick to the plan, you'll be fine. All right, so let's see. This one is kind of weird. We have 34.5%. So what I want to do, I don't like working with the fraction. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that into a decimal. But I'll tell you why I don't like the fraction. So remember, our plan is normally to put it over 100. But when I do that, I just all of a sudden have like a complex fraction, and I don't like that. So I'm going to change it into a decimal, which remember we know how to do. You keep the whole number part, and then you change the fraction. So the fraction, what is a half as a decimal? Well, a half, remember, is 0.5. So this is going to be 34.5 over 100. And then now we have it written over 100, and our plan as usual is to take our decimal and move it to the, which direction? To the left. How many times? Twice. Very good. We put that decimal down there. Am I forgetting something? Yes, I am. I forgot that 0. Awesome. And please remember, we don't use that as our zeros. In math, that is the empty set. So please resist the temptation to use this symbol if you normally use it. Okay? That's the 0 most people would say is the correct 0. I don't know of many people in the medical field that would use that as a 0. Oops, I just wrote my answer wrong. And there we go. All right, you might hear my dog barking in the background. I am sorry about that. All right, here we go. Now we're going to convert a decimal into a percent, the exact opposite direction. All right, so we have our decimal, 1.43. What is our plan? Multiply the decimal by 100. Now, when you multiply a decimal by 100, what happens is you move the decimal 2 places to the right. Because remember, we're going the exact opposite of what we did here. We're going in the reverse direction now. It's good to know how to get from a decimal to percent, and also how to get back. Just like it's good to know how to get to target, and you want to know how to drive back home. All right. Yeah, let's see. So we're going to multiply this by 100. And when we do that, our decimal is going to move 2 places to the right. You might even hear the chickens in the background right now. All right. So let's see. Moving the decimal to the right, we get 143. And then we're going to add the percent symbol. And there we go. 143%. And we're done. Not too bad. All right, go ahead and try B by yourself and check back in with me in a second. All right, let's see, 0.05. We're going to turn that into a percent, so we'll multiply by 100. When I do that, the decimal moves 2 places. 1, 2. And I'm left with, okay, so this is where you might get a little confused. You might think I need to write 005. But this is the number 5. And most of the time, if you're talking about, let's say, $5, you wouldn't say $005. Okay, so a way you can think of it is these zeros are no longer needed. That 0 was a placeholder to tell us where the decimal was. But as the decimal moved, we do not need those zeros anymore, so we can just write 5. Alrighty, and then adding our percent symbol, 5%. There we go. And last one, B. All right. Interesting. So 0.7, go ahead and multiply that by 100. And as usual, we'll move that decimal to the right twice. 1, 2. Get our 0 right there. So we're filling in that blank space that didn't have a number, we fill it in with a 0. Okay, so that's always the plan. If you have a blank space, fill it in with a 0. And we have 70. You don't need to put 70 in the decimal. You can just leave it at 70. And the percent symbol. And there we have it. All right, second page. Convert a percent into an equivalent fraction. Okay, so now instead of turning the percent into a decimal, we're turning it into a fraction. So the plan, write the percent as a fraction. Replace the percent by dividing 100. Okay, we already did that step previously. We switched out the percent symbol for 100. The next thing, instead of turning it into a decimal, we're just going to reduce the fraction. Okay, so the step has changed just a little bit. But we did this first step previously. We know changing that, we just write 15 over 100. That's how we get rid of the percent symbol. But now the plan, instead of turning it into a decimal, we're just going to simplify. So here's the question. Are 15 and 100 divisible by the same number? Yeah, they're both divisible by 5. So I can divide them both by 5. And what do I get? Well, 15 divided by 5 is 3, and 100 divided by 5 should be 20. Let's see, 3 and 20, are they divisible by anything in common? Nope, 3 is just divisible by 3 and 1. 20 is divisible by, let's see, 1, 2, 5, and 10, I believe. Yep, they don't share anything in common. And there we go, our fraction in simplest terms. All right, let's do the next one, 130. All right, so similar plan as with decimals, you're going to go ahead and get rid of that percent symbol and write it over 100. But we're just going to simplify. So see, they both have a 0 on the top and the bottom. That means they're divisible by 10. So this is the shortcut way. We're just going to cancel out those two zeros because they're both divisible by 10. And let's just rewrite 13 over 10. All right. Well, 13 and 10, that is as simple as it can get. But real quick, if you read our directions, it says our answer is a mixed number. So this at the moment is an improper fraction. Why? Remember, because the numerator is bigger than the denominator. So let's change that. That's going to be 1 3/10. Let's check if I'm right. 10 times 1 is 10, plus 3 is 13. Yep. Okay, so remember, if you try to remember how I get from this number to this one, you're going to do the long division. So how many times can 10 go into 13? Okay, and there was a small error on this problem. That should be a percent symbol tucked away near the 3/4. Sorry about that. Please go ahead and edit that on your paper. So we want to turn 3/4% into an equivalent fraction. Well, to do that, remember the plan is to just divide our number by 100. So let's just go ahead and do that. 3/4 divided by 100. But remember before, I said I didn't like working with the double fraction going on there, that complex fraction. So I'm going to turn 3/4 into a decimal. Do we know what 3/4 is? That's 3/4, right? Well, that's 75 cents. Okay. We have a small problem here that is a decimal, so we don't want it to be a decimal. So what I'm going to do is to get rid of it being a decimal, you remember if we multiply a number by 100, we move the decimal to the right twice, right? So if I manage to move this decimal 2 places over, I wouldn't have a decimal anymore. I would have the number 75. So to get rid of that decimal, my plan is to multiply top and bottom by 100. Why am I doing this? Because I don't like that decimal in the fraction. I'm not allowed to have that in my final answer. So when I multiplied by 100, I got to move that decimal out of the way. But now on the bottom, I got a huge number. I got 10,000 going on. Wouldn't you like that in your bank account? All right. Let's check. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Awesome. Okay, so let's go ahead and see. 75. Can that go into 10,000? I believe it does. Oops, give me 1 second. Just checking a calculation. Oh, it doesn't perfectly. All right, well, they're both divisible by 25. 75 divided by 25, if you're thinking in terms of quarters, is going to be 3. And 10,000 divided by 25 is 400. So you could do the long division and check that. So that's going to be 3 over 400. And that is simple. Okay, so this one was the kind of the strange one, because one, we had a fraction originally, and we wanted to get rid of that. And then we turned it into a decimal, but we couldn't leave a decimal in our final answer. So we had to multiply the top and bottom by 100 to move the decimal over. Then once we did that, we could finally get it simplified with a nice fraction with whole numbers on the top and the bottom. So converting a fraction to a percent. First, convert the fraction to a decimal. Okay, we know how to do that. Second, round the decimal to the nearest 100. Okay, so if we don't have a perfect, I guess you could say, if our number doesn't divide perfectly, we're going to have to do some rounding. And then thirdly, we're going to follow the rule for converting a decimal to a percent. Okay, what was the rule for converting a decimal to a percent? That was back on page 1. Okay, we can refer to that later. All right, but first, we're going to convert the fraction to a decimal. So starting out with a half. What is a half as a decimal? Well, it's 0.5. That's not too bad. Well, the number's already doesn't need any rounding, so we're good. We don't have to do step 2. 3, follow the rule for converting the decimal to a percent. So what is that rule? Well, converting a decimal to a percent, you multiply the decimal by 100 and add the percent symbol. Let's do it. So multiplying 0.5 by 100, we're going to get, let's do 0.5 times 100. When we do that, we move the decimal over 2 places, 1, 2. Add in that extra 0. And we have 50. Last step, add the percent symbol, so 50%. So that makes sense, right? If you got half of the answers correct on your exam, you'd expect to get a 50%. Sounds right. Okay, well, go ahead and try B by yourself and check back in with me in a second. All right, well, 3/4, we know that is 0.75, so it's 3/4. We're going to go ahead and multiply 0.75 by 100 because we're working to change it into a percent. When we do that, we move the decimal place over how many times? Twice, and to the right. Boop. All right, so we have 75, and then adding in that final percent symbol, 75%. Yeah, so 3/4 of your test was correct. That's 75% of your test. Sounds good. Ooh, and this one's fun. That's a mixed number. All right, so for the mixed number, you're going to turn it into an improper fraction. Or you could technically turn it into a decimal. Either one. But let's go ahead and stick with... Now, you know what? Because our plan in the end is to move the decimal over, I want to turn this into a decimal. Okay, so that's my plan. I'm changing my plan. Because we end up moving our decimal, I'm going to change this into a decimal. So that's going to be 1, and what is 3/4? 3/4, we already know, was 0.75. So that's 1 and 0.75. So 1.75. We're going to go ahead and multiply that by 100, and when we do that, move the decimal over twice, and our answer is 175%. Chugging along. Alrighty. Ooh, 3.2, ratios. So a ratio is like a... Now, sorry, once again, there is a typo on my note. I have for some reason, duplicated which expressions. So that should not be there. It is, and I'll tell you in a second. A ratio is like a fraction. In the end, I'm going to refill this with which represents. Okay? So a ratio is like a fraction which represents the relationship of a part to a whole. Okay? So a ratio is like a fraction which represents a relationship of a part to a whole. Ratios may relate a quantity of a liquid drug to a quantity of the solution, or ratio may be used to express how much a drug is in a caplet or capsule. The two parts are separated by a colon. Boop, boop. Some people call it the snowman, whatever you want to call it, or the snake bite. All right. Example 1. A tablet contains 250 milligrams of a certain drug. Write a ratio that represents the tablet. All right. So the ratio, so the tablet, it's going to be the part to a whole. So 1 and 250. All right, so when writing a ratio, A to B, you only use whole numbers. Okay, so we're all going to use whole numbers. You're not going to use decimals or fractions. All right, so let's look at example 2. Which of the following are correct examples of ratios? Go ahead and try this one by yourself and see if you can identify